Okay, so this is now my presentation number 10 in this series discussing the decolonization of the social sciences. In this presentation, I want to discuss the question: who revises what? More precisely, decolonization is a critique of what they call the Western or the societies of the North. And this critique asks them to decolonize their thinking. I discussed that in the previous presentations. And in this presentation, I want to dig a little bit into the question: who, in this critique, in this request, coming from academics, mainly from the former colonized world, who, in this critique, has to really revise the theories they create. It seems to be obvious that decolonization asks these, with this critique, opposed Western social sciences to change their way of thinking. And as we heard before, this is not asking them to change this or that theory. It is asking them to change in a very fundamental way their way of thinking. What this means and in which direction this thinking is asked to be changed, I discussed in the previous presentations, reflecting on what it means to give the space of thinking a position, an epistemological position in creating theories. Now, to discuss this question, who is revising, after all, which theories, I want to read a quotation from a criminologist. This is a sociologist specialized in criminology, and if I remember correctly, he comes from Nigeria. I want to read this quotation because, sorry, I'm not able to show it as a photo in my video. I have to learn how to do that. So I read it, and I read it twice. The quotation is saying this: decolonization criminology does not assume that indigenous societies were a paradise of tranquility before they were conquered and colonized, nor that decolonization would usher in a crime-free society. Rather, decolonization is a matter of social justice under the assumption that the invasion, kidnapping, enslavement, and mass murder of indigenous people represent organized crimes against humanity, and so decolonization should be at the core of criminological theory rather than be ignored, excluded, or relegated to the margins. I argue that it is in the interest of humanity and of criminologists to decolonize the entire world and the discipline of criminology, because it is dangerous for any discipline to evade major developments that are relevant to the core subjects of the discipline, especially when we are talking about threats to humanity. I just read it again. Decolonization criminology does not assume that indigenous societies were a paradise of tranquility before they were conquered and colonized, nor that decolonization would usher in a crime-free society. Rather, decolonization is a matter of social justice under the assumption that the invasion, kidnapping, enslavement, and mass murder of indigenous people represent organized crimes against humanity, and so decolonization should be at the core of criminological theory rather than be ignored, excluded, or relegated to the margins. I argue that it is in the interest of humanity and of criminologists to decolonize the entire world and the discipline of criminology, because it is dangerous for any discipline to evade major developments that are relevant to the core subjects of the discipline, especially when we are thinking about threats to humanity. The subtopics in this presentation about the question that I will analyze along this quotation, the question, who is finally revising theories thanks to the decolonization of thinking. This presentation will discuss four topics. Number one is, I want to analyze this quotation to find out what, in this case of decolonizing criminology, decolonization means. Secondly, I want to discuss the question, if it has become clear from this quotation, and digging a little bit into how this criminologist is arguing, I want to dig a little bit into the question what the hereby critiqued Western, Northern, whatever, social sciences are requested to do to become decolonized. After that, I will reflect on the question, what does the decolonization described in this quotation for criminology, what does this decolonization of thinking, what does it mean, what does it request from those who advocate this decolonization? And finally, and thirdly, number 3, I want to discuss a little bit the point how the Marxism, as it was developed by the Soviet Union, the so-called historical materialism, how this interpretation of Marx's critique of capitalism, how this has paved the ways for the revision of thinking of those who advocate the decolonization of theories. And I'm asking that question because what I will have to prove is, and try to prove is, that decolonizations of social science thinking provides to throw overboard the critique of capitalism. Let me come to my first point. My first point is, What does it mean to decolonize criminology? I quickly read this first part again, not the whole thing, but just the first part. Decolonization criminology does not assume that indigenous societies were a paradise of tranquility before they were conquered and colonized, nor that decolonization would usher in a crime-free society. Rather, decolonization is a matter of social justice under the assumption that the invasion, kidnapping, enslavement and mass murder of indigenous people represent organized crimes against humanity, and so decolonization should be at the core of criminological theory. What this man, criminologist, is all stirring into the same pot, to say it in more theoretical words, what he is all equating is amazing. Firstly, he considers any breaching of rules in any society, may it be the societies before colonization, may it be the societies which were colonized, may it be the societies of today, the societies we are living in. So, the pre-colonized, the colonized, and the post-colonized societies. In all these societies, he considers any breaching of any rule as the same crime, as a crime. That is, he is equating, firstly, the kind of rules of living these three societies practice. He just says that any rules indigenous societies had, any rules colonized societies practiced, any rules today's societies practice, they are all crimes. That means looking at violating any rule, he interprets as if they were in all societies breaching laws, violating laws, because he describes them all with the same category as crimes. A crime is a category from the post-colonial societies, from the societies of the colonizers, in which the rules of these societies, what people are supposed to do and what not, are fixed as laws, and in which breaching these laws is considered as a crime and treated in a very particular way. Pre-capitalist societies, colonized societies, and indigenous societies before colonization, he says, because they also knew they had people not following the rules these society established. The indigenous societies, the colonized societies, as the societies after colonization, which are the societies we are living in today, all over the world, including the former colonies, which have adjusted their society system, as I discussed before many times, to the system of the colonizers. They are all capitalist societies. This guy interprets any violation of any rule as if they were all breaching laws. This is not just a harmless little error. It means that for this criminologist, the existing way of establishing rules, the existing way of defining rules, and the existing way of sanctioning violation of rules. Doing this, firstly, defining rules as laws. Laws made up, decided by political bodies. By the political bodies of this citizen society, decided by a nation state, decided by the politicians of a state, decided thanks to their power monopoly, executed and supervised with the legal system of this society system, executed by the police, by a police, I should better say, and sanctioned by denying people who breach these rules, by taking away their freedom of acting as citizens, putting them into prison. All this criminologists equates with how and what and in which way previous societies have dealt with breaking rules by any members of these societies. This is firstly a wrong abstraction. A wrong abstraction that equates three types of different societies: the indigenous society, the colonized society, and the society system of the colonizers. It presents the legal system, and with the legal system, the subject which is holding the legal system, the state, or call it the nation state. It equates this nation state with all previous society systems in which there was no nation state. It didn't exist. This is a false abstraction. However, this is not at all the only mistakes. The abstraction is even worse. Just to remind you, what he is saying is, and this is what he asks criminologists to do. Rather, he says, decolonization is a matter of social justice under the assumption that the invasion, kidnapping, enslavement, and mass murder of indigenous people represents organized crimes against humanity. He talks about the violent actions of the colonizers, the imperialists, against the colonized people in the colonies. I want to read this again. Rather, decolonization is a matter of social justice under the assumption that the invasion, kidnapping, enslavement, and mass murder of indigenous people represent organized crimes against humanity. Do you notice? What he is describing here as organized crimes, these are the massive killing, as he says, kidnapping, enslavement, and mass murder. Of whom? Of the very state of the colonizers. So it is this very state of the colonizers who organizes and executes this invasion, kidnapping, enslavement, and mass murder. The first scandal is again, he enumerates any kind of breaching law. He mentioned at the beginning, also in the indigenous societies, there were people who were breaching any rules. He equates with breaching laws, but I discussed that false abstraction already. Now, he even equates stealing a pineapple or killing a grandson, whatever. He equates this violation of rules. He firstly all equated as crimes, that is, as the activities you can only find in terms of how they are defined and how they are prosecuted and how they are sanctioned in these capitalist societies. He now even equates these individual crimes with the military actions, the mass murder, kidnapping, enslavement of indigenous people. He equates this, the state actions of colonialists, he equates this with crimes. Just as if stealing a bicycle was the same as mass murder, genocide. And in order to be able to not allow himself, the reader, whomever, he omits the subject of this. That is why he is saying they represent organized crimes against humanity. And in this notion, kidnapping, enslavement, mass murder of indigenous people are organized crimes against humanity. You don't find the subject. who is organizing these crimes? It is not mentioned. And if you would mention that, you would have to introduce some distinctions between the substance of crimes. What is it about? He mentioned this. But since he is so keen on equating everything, he omits the subject of mass murder and all the other organized crimes, as he called them. And why does he do that? Why does he ignore the subject of colonization, the subjects of mass murder and all these organized crimes? Because he doesn't want to criticize states. More than that, he obviously believes that states, nation states, who did these crimes of the colonizers have to admit that they did a crime in front of humanity. So what he is doing is he introduces a subject, humanity, a subject compared to which he is able to equate everything. The stealing of a bicycle, the mass murder, whatever kind of breaching of whichever rule of whichever society, indigenous, colonized, colonizers, all for him the same. In order to throw this all into the same pot, he creates a subject, humanity, in which he finally omits, deletes, extinguishes any difference between the subjects of crimes, the substance of crimes, the format of crimes, the way crimes are defined, who defines things as crimes, what is the criteria to define things as crimes, how are they sanctionized and why are they sanctionized and who is sanctionized. All this he stirs into the big pot of crime by mobilizing as the subject of dealing with any crime, which is humanity. So in other words, he does not want to talk about what the colonizers did, distinguished from what the indigenous societies did, distinguished from what a violation of any rule in which society was what and how it was sanctioned and how it was dealt with. He doesn't want to make any of such kind of distinctions because he is up to a very clear intention. The intention is to embrace criminologists from the whole world in the name of decolonization and for the project of decolonization. And in order to do this, to embrace them all and invite them to become followers of this project of decolonization, he throws overboard all distinctions between all the societies, between what they consider as breaching any rules, etc., etc. In other words, humanity is an abstraction he mobilizes for this purpose, to embrace the whole world of criminologists. And this is an abstraction because humanity doesn't exist. There is no humanity. Humanity is nothing else but the moral idea of the unified world under the most abstract category, which, for this very reason, in order to get it unified, doesn't want to know any differences, not to mention any contradictions between all these subjects. And especially, he wants to omit the conflicts between the colonizers and the colonies, and he wants also to extinguish any differences or conflicts between the today's post-colonial societies in the former colonized world, those societies which also have become capitalist societies. He wants to also extinguish any conflicting interests between the today's imperialists and the today's new independent societies in the former colonized world. I stop here for a moment and continue in a couple of seconds.